Hi, welcome back to Bedroom Brainiacs. Bedroom Brainiacs is adult sex ed for everything you wish you learned in high school. This is the second video in our series on the anatomy of pleasure. The first video was about human bodies in general. We talked about how genitals all develop from the same clump of tissue when a fetus is developing in the uterus. We also talked about skin and nerve endings and erectile tissue. Today's topic is the vulva and the clitoris. I'm going to do my best not to use gendered language like female anatomy or women's body parts, because we know that having these body parts doesn't mean you identify as female, and identifying as female doesn't mean you have these body parts. So that's going down the path of talking about gender identity. That's a very complex and rich topic that deserves a video all on its own. So when we talk about body parts, I'm going to do my best to talk about them without assigning a gender. As I mentioned, this video is going to go over the vulva and the clitoris. Since the clitoris is part of the vulva, let's start by talking about the vulva and the parts that it includes. So the vulva is a group of body parts that are on the outside of the body for people who internally have a vagina and a uterus and fallopian tubes and ovaries. A lot of the times this is referred to as the vagina. The vulva is usually referred to as the vagina. Technically, the vagina is the internal passageway that connects the outside of the body, the vaginal opening, to the inside of the body, the cervix and the uterus. But most of the time, like in movies or in just casual conversation, when someone says a vagina, what they're actually referring to is the vulva. And now you know the difference. So there's a couple different ways to think about the anatomy of the vulva. We can approach it going from the top down, or we can approach it going from the outside in. If you use the outside in approach, on the very outside of the vulva are the outer labia. These are there for cushioning and for protection. And then inside the outer labia are the inner labia. These are thinner, more thin tissue. And these wrap around the urethra and the vaginal opening. So the urethra is where urine exits the body, and the vaginal opening is the entrance to the vagina. Now, if you think about the vulva going from the top down, at the very top of the vulva is the clitoris. Below that is the urethra. Below that is the vaginal opening. And below that is the anus, where solid waste leaves the body. Another important part of the vulva is hair. We have hair on all parts of our bodies. There's hair on the vulva. Some people will leave it there. Some people will remove it. It has a purpose. It's there for protection. It's there to keep out germs and bacteria and anything that could cause an infection or cause irritation to those parts. So whether you keep it or remove it is your personal preference. Now, in terms of pleasure, all parts of the vulva can feel pleasurable when they're touched and stimulated. What feels good is going to change person to person, and the best way to figure that out is to use communication and consent with your partners to talk about what feels good for you and what feels good for them. Now, going more specific into the clitoris, most people, if they're lucky enough to be taught about the clitoris, are taught that the clitoris is a small ball about the size of a pea at the very top of the vulva. That's true, but that's just part of it. Most of the clitoris is internal and something that you cannot see from the outside. The part of the clitoris that you can see and directly touch is called the glans, or the clitoral glands. And then the gland is actually the very top of a structure that kind of looks like a wishbone. So going down, the two sides of the wishbone are called the crura, or the legs. These are made out of erectile tissue, so these can be touched and stimulated from the outside, touching sort of the parts of the vulva that run alongside and outside the vaginal opening and the urethra. Sort of inside the crura and the legs are two larger masses of erectile tissue called the bulbs. And if you think about the vagina as a tube, the bulbs kind of sit on the outside of the tubes and rest against it. So when something is inside the vagina, like a finger or a penis or a toy, and that movement is happening inside the vagina, that movement can stimulate the bulbs and cause them to become erect and engorged. And then conversely, when those bulbs are erect and engorged, that increase in size can cause them to kind of lean against and put pressure on the vagina in a way that feels pleasurable and can feel pleasurable when something is moving inside the vagina. So that's just a really brief overview of the clitoris and the vulva and how they contribute to pleasure. A lot of times when we talk about sexual anatomy, we focus on periods and menstruation and reproduction and pregnancy and babies. And we kind of leave pleasure off the table. So hopefully this gave you just some more insight into how our bodies are designed for pleasure. And if you are a visual learner, there are some really good illustrations and diagrams of the clitoris and the vulva that you can easily find by looking on the internet. So thanks for watching.